Chapter 18. The Beach, Relief, and the Wounded Hurt while working in the kitchen at Berts. When something hurts, it can drive you berserk. And yet that same type of pain that makes you feel insane can push you to do great work. And so I thought of a quote from Gibran, as if I could hear his voice from afar. Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. A scar began forming around the wound upon my left ankle, but the poison wouldn't settle. As I wrapped the turban around my head, it had only been a short while before it affected the layers of the physical, emotional, and mental. Although I was curious how fast the poison would spread, maybe I was more terrified that my own head had started to grow a set of horns. When I found the ocean's coast, I looked for the lighthouse. There at the edge of the 28th kingdom, I dipped my legs into the ocean, and at once, this sacred water began to calm my doubts. I'm not sure what this oceanic power was, but I thought of it as a tide of infinite love. And so I spent the whole day in the sun, swimming in that giant ocean pond. Whenever I was near the ocean, I did find a sense of relief. And so day after day, I would spend as much time with the holy waters where I felt most at ease. I would spend my time ingesting herbs and fruits, and I noticed that my body began to transform. I'd gotten quite lean, and somehow I needed less food than before. As soon as I went toward the 28th kingdom, I felt the poison spread into my head. I managed to keep a straight face, but imagine walking through life knowing that something within you was liquid death. As I tried my best, I would get upset for reasons I cannot explain. The tiniest thing could set me off, and I would run to the beach so that I would not go insane. At the beach, I found herbs that helped, and there were ones I would smoke that would propel me into the unconscious. Here I would dissociate from the material world, and I would dance in the space of dreams where the soul lives. The herbs seemed to give me nourishment, but I was also quite disconnected from reality. And so as I would sit on the beach and stare off into the distance, I felt how some people would mock or laugh at me. My behavior was unusual at best, but no one knew the battle I'd been attacked by on my inside, and so often I would sit in meditation, keeping my body still, while every living layer of me would be panicking on the inside. I came to know this feeling as the times when Lilith would scream. She'd be so far away, but I could hear her yell, and like an earthquake rattling from the underground, I felt her calling out from the bottom of hell. There was nothing I could do, and so I'd wait like a log to let it pass. Eventually, I'd find myself swimming in the shallows of the sacred ocean, where I'd find a glimpse of relief at last. Day by day, I would smoke that herb, and as I disassociated from the material world, there were all kinds of inward secrets that I observed. Hard to explain, but my body became aligned with unique postures. And so some days, I'd balance on my tiptoes with my hips near my heels, and there I would hear a voice in the wind whisper. I wondered if this was the Golden Maiden daydreaming. Maybe she was calling out for her lover, but she had to be so high up in that castle, and I was so low in the kingdom beneath her. The flint stones would spark a fire, and again I'd burn the herb. I'd turn inward while the world around me focused on the outside, and there I'd look at the horizon to see what inner wisdom I could learn and gather. More and more postures came to life, and so I began to salute the sun. I felt as if this was a connection back to the great Firebird, the one who lifts us out of death so that we can be reborn. As I went inward, more peculiar things would appear on the outside. As if I lived among ghosts and spirits, I began to wonder if this earthly land was interwoven with all those who had died. Out of nowhere I'd get a glimpse, a certain sign, and so the moon would signal from high above at the perfect time to show me that my reality had indeed aligned. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, it's hard to explain, but at just the right moment, I'd be standing at a dock, then the moon would be perfectly overhead, and just then my reality would click as if everything had been reframed. I saw the dock like the hour hand of a clock, and the moon was telling me the time. Why, something within my soul, body, and mind snapped into place, and for the next day, I felt extremely aligned. It's so hard to describe all the things my inner nature had come to discover and find, and so I would reflect and wonder about that deck of cards. All the while, I wore the red turban as a cover over my mind. Just as I was curious about that tarot deck, which I hadn't yet figured out how to use, I wandered to a place called the Old Jack of Cups, and to my luck, right there on the counter, I got a clue. The bar was covered in animal spirit cards, and these were oracle cards of all kinds. I think the staff thought I might be crazy, or maybe I did in fact lose my mind. Most people came in with their lovers, but I was always on my own. One day the manager asked me if I read cards, and I said I didn't know how to. "Well, here's a book to read if you're trying to figure out what to do," she said. The book held the descriptions for the animal spirit deck, and it gave me a description of each card. There I observed that the pictorial representations were reflections of the forces of nature. That night, I went to the beach and I did my first reading. I asked the universe about my past, present, and future, and I could not fathom what I was seeing. It outlined everything perfectly, and this gave me hope. Another clue from the universe, another solution that offered relief for the pain with which I was trying to cope. Shuffling the deck, I could ask it questions, like what will today bring? And there it would reveal a card perfectly, as if the universe had its own mind to think. Now, how to explain this, but call it synchronicity? And just as the card stated, the day would align to whatever the card spoke of, as if it all happened magically. At first, this was a bit terrifying, but I knew that this was a great guide. Often when my ego would bring me to the edge of madness, I would trust that these cards were linked to guidance from a spiritual source inside. I don't know if I'd recommend tarot cards for everyone, but they helped me navigate my inner world. They would get me out of chaotic and turbulent situations when my life appeared to swirl. In time, I knew I had to make progress, otherwise the poison would only grow worse. And even though I found healing at the sacred spring, it was not a permanent cure for the pain that hurts. And so I went into town, looking for work, but I'd become quite a strange creature of humanity, and I would notice that sometimes, during conversations, the poison would block my mind stream as if this moment was something that could not be heard. For example, I'd go to talk about a job, and right as I sat down for the interview, Lilith would begin to scream so loud that my inner layers would be blocked as a chaotic hell would ensue. I'd answer the interview questions the best I could, but was I actually there? Why, I was trying to earn a job, but inside, all I felt was terrified and scared. Missed opportunity after missed opportunity. I went and applied at many factories and shops. I tried over and over, but I could not get a job. This began to haunt me, because in this world, you need to make a living to survive. And so I went back to the ocean's coast, looking for relief, fearing that soon my life would expire and die. But then what of my family? And what of this path? I would not quit so quickly, even if my life had been plunged into madness. That night I had an idea, and so I shuffled a Native American tarot deck and asked the question, what lives within? The card that appeared was called the Matriarch of Blades, and there I heard Lilith's terror sing. This pressure was heavy and immense, and I didn't know where to go. And so by chance, one day, as I walked upon the beach, I found a unique soul. A man's dog was barking, and I wanted to bark right back, and so the man spoke. "Don't worry about old Moses. He won't attack. "What's your name?" I asked. "Patrick," he said. "Nice to meet you, Patrick. I'm James." Now, as I looked to his giant dog, it was a mix between a mastiff and a pit bull. It had a huge ball sack, and wherever this man walked, it was the dog by which he was pulled. Patrick was very relaxed and easygoing, and he came to the coast from inland, and his kindness was always showing. Out of all the people on the beach, this man didn't seem to be bothered by me, because by this point, my diet was mostly water, herbs, and apples, and with the power of the herbs, my body had grown muscular and skinny. Soft and rigid, I seemed to be holding my body as if I was always flexed. I think this pushed many people away, but they didn't understand that the poison within was pinching off my head from my neck. "What do you do?" asked Patrick. "I used to sell industrial automation systems. Then I wandered around the earth. I met a white buffalo in the woods, but after I returned home, I got bit by a snake, and ever since, I've been wounded and hurt." "Ah, I see. Sounds like you're a good dude to me. I moved to this beach because it makes me feel at peace, but everybody's gotta work, because our government isn't giving away life for free," said Patrick. "Yeah, that's right, but I can't seem to get a job. I'm a little tangled up on the inside. I guess you could say I'm a bit caught." "Well, that's not a problem, my dude. I work over at Berts. You know, the beach shack. We've got a little kitchen, and we're the closest business to the shore," said Patrick. "The shore? You mean it's right next to the ocean?" "Oh, hell yeah. And sometimes, during smoke breaks, people go swimming," said Patrick. This was the relief I needed. No job would take me if they knew my mind went mad, and so whatever job I could find at Berts was the job I needed to have. I met with Julia and Omar, the owners, and within a day, they took me in, and so a magical adventure was set to begin. Now, how do I describe Berts, other than saying it's rather raw and has a deep connection to the ocean and the earth? Where other shops might be graded on cleanliness and perfect tables, Berts didn't require shoes or a shirt. On my first day, I got a work shirt, and so I read the back, which held one of their mottos: patronized by freaks, surfers, skaters, crunks, retirees, tourists, stoners, day trippers, hippies, hipsters, and regular folk. Berts is the rockingest grocery in town. Folly Beach, South Carolina. Then I went to the sticker section, and I saw another motto: Berts, we may doze, but we never close. Hey Patrick, what does this mean? We're open 24/7, 365, and even when a hurricane comes through, Berts doesn't close, even if the city's power was to die. Let's say we lose electricity, then the owners give away the ice cream for free. They figure that in time it's going to melt anyway. Berts is always open, at all hours of the night, and believe me, we've witnessed some strange things, but I haven't really seen many people fight. I saw a vampire once, said the kitchen guy named Trey. I saw her too, said Eric from the cashier across the way. Now Trey had dreadlocks down to his ankles, and he was covered in tattoos. From his ankles to his neck, and about every week, he'd get tattoos that were fresh and new. Then Eric was a deep soul, and he rode a unicycle. We'd all go walk and smoke after we finished the second shift, then we'd gaze up at the starlight. And so in time, I began to see Berts as a living organism, and I won't even discuss the living creatures I saw come in. Some were animals, but most were human. As I worked in the kitchen, I was the lowest of low. Then they threw me on the cash register for a single afternoon, but it was peak season and I was overloaded. And so I stayed making sandwiches of all sorts, beside Trey, Patrick, Eric, and others. And soon I realized that Berts was a lost family of mine, of outcast sisters and brothers. Wherever I'd come from, this was the exact opposite. Whatever ego I once had was dead here, because any reasonable person that would have tried to work in this kitchen would have quit. There was a sense of exquisite chaos, as something was often breaking or going wrong. And one day, the owner had me engineer a leaking solution to catch the droplets of water that were falling from above. We tied buckets all over the ceiling, and he told me to remember and keep track when they get full. But this place was open 24/7, and at a certain time, I wanted to go home. And so when I saved a tiny bit of money, I rented the smallest room on the beach, which was a back closet. Living with a beach gal who had made the coaster home, I'd get home to relax where I would hide. With herb and air, I'd get lost in postures and cards. I'd go to the ocean for relief, and this chapter of my life was the most hard. It felt like I'd fallen from heaven, and I had little money. I felt trapped outside and within, and whenever I met people, I wondered if they were making fun of me. I didn't fit anywhere, and none of the cool kids wanted me in their crew. And so I'd buy birdseed and sit on the beaches and analyze how the birds flew. I remembered one day I was meditating, and so I put a handful of birdseed right behind my back. I wanted to see which of the pigeons were really courageous, and of course I worked with my own fear in case they were to attack. After a while, no birds came close, and so I took a bunch of seeds in my hand and sprinted down the coast. Running through tourists and beachgoers, I would throw the seed up in the air. I must have had 30 or so birds flying with me, and everyone on the beach seemed concerned, terrified, and scared. Who dare? I could hear the beachgoers think. But little did they know, I'd been poisoned and my life had been pushed to the brink, and so I sat on the edge of the world, over by the old lighthouse. I'd worship the water, the air, the earth, the fire, and the coast. The cards would guide me, and day after day, I went back to my kitchen duties. It was dirty work, and I was so tired that I often felt like this world was using me. All my money went to pay for the tiny closet I slept in, and whatever was left, I'd use for herbs and food. At least the sacred ocean was free, where I could calm my madness and mercurial moods. Then one day I met a woman, and her name was Elle. We were over by the surf bar, when she wasn't afraid to come up and meet me. I'm sure I was stoned and dazed, somewhere in the inner world, and yet she wasn't intimidated or scared of me, and so I really appreciated the gentleness of this kind girl. "Hey you," she asked, "we've got this thing going on. You want in?" "Sure, what is it?" "So you have to tell us what color your underwear is, then the last thing you ate," said Elle. "Why's that?" "Because it's your stripper name," said Elle. As I lifted up my shirt, thank goodness I wore underwear. Then I pulled at the waistband, which had started to unravel. "Look at that. Then I'm a black apple," I told her. She laughed and we became friends that night. That's when I learned she'd come back from a war in the Middle East, and she was a medic that healed the soldiers who had come to fight. I'd never gone to war, but I was wounded like her and her comrades. It was another great blessing from the universe, and I was so thankful to have a few new friends. By this time it had been months, and unintentionally, Elle had given me an idea for my stripper name Black Apple. I'm not even sure if I was in control of my life at this point, or maybe I was being directed by a woman who chained me while I carried the shackles. And so I felt pulled to let go, and there I applied for a job online. It was called the Butlers in Buff, that offered unique, punky, male butler services, and this is when I knew I might be out of my mind. On the application, they barely asked about past work, which was rather nice. They just wanted a shirtless selfie to see if I was a hunk of man who could entice. A day later, I got the job, all thanks to herb, water, and the apples I seemed to eat. Not going to lie, I was shredded by this point, because the postures and positions of yoga is all I did every day on repeat. I'd become a bit addicted to the herb, because it would get me in or out of my head. Sometimes I'd be doing yoga for so long that I'd forget this poison had sentenced me to a kind of death. Now this butler in the buff work, well, it was a one-of-a-kind gig, because they wanted me to take off my pants along with my shirt. Bachelorette groups would hire me, and so I'd wear a black apron over my crotch, but the back was exposed and open. It was then that I learned quickly how these women did more than just watch. So fascinating to go from everyone thinking I was a freak to now everyone wanted my number. My ego was empty, and since I died just about every day, there were so many details I couldn't quite remember. Now what I'm most proud of is who I was when I looked in the mirror. I didn't take any girls or women home, and I stuck to virtue and good principles because I simply kept the apron on, went home, and did my postures on the beach so that I could heal. I only did that job 3 times, and 3 bachelorette parties was enough. There was something so auspicious to that number, and there I learned how the feminine also has a bit of work to do on their own stuff. Most of them were kind, but some of them also treated me as not quite human. I suppose that's what I signed up for, but there I learned how women also use men. And as I worked in the kitchen at Berts, before long, I started to go a little berserk. Kitchen work means I would stand for 9 to 10 hours cooking for others, and this work, plus the poison in my system, really started to hurt. The summer was crazy, and finally it started to slow down. There I got a hint from the universe. That was my time when I was almost done. I remember when Patrick died, because it took me by surprise. One day he worked at Bert's, then the next he was in the hospital, and I never got to say goodbye. His dog Moses got adopted, and I went to a celebration of life. Mostly it was the Bert staff and a few others, but without saying farewell, nothing seemed right. It was one of my first friends on Folly, and everyone thought we were freaks. But you'll never know the pain someone is suffering when you judge them, and so I left Bert's before I went to the ocean for that endless relief. About every day I thought I might die, and so the dying way always seemed to be happening inside. The Greeks called this katabasis, or the journey of ashes. It's the journey to the land of death and the underworld where a part of us must die. Well, for months I hadn't felt alive, and so I started to think I was just a matriarch of blades on the inside. And before long, the roommate I'd been living with and her boyfriend had gotten in trouble with the police, and so I knew this was my time to leave the little closet on the island. I took the little money I had left, and I got a room a bit more inland. As magical as Folly Beach is and will always be, it was time for me to make my way into the 28th Kingdom.